I'm going to kick back in the chair and kick in. Let's do it.
It's funny. I was thinking about the last time that I contacted you, and I said that I was feeling pangs of atheism, and you told me to go outside, take a deep breath, look at the sun.
Did I?
Yeah, and
That's
then
right.
tell me if there's no God. And it's not an agnostic thing, but I do think in terms of what you do in inspiring people to be more creative. I took a class at the University of Wisconsin called it was Integrated Liberal Studies, and there was a quote that the teacher wrote on the board. He wrote, "Man is the measure of God's imagination." And I was thinking, wow, as soon as you had told me whatever you told me, I thought in terms of that quote. And I was thinking, wow, well, if I have imagination, or if I have any kind of pluck, maybe it's because it's planned. It's planned by the creator. But
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough discussion to jump into, but I like it. I like it very much. When you're talking about creativity, or as is just occurring to me now, there's so much talk about creativity, and there's such an obvious omission at times. At any other time in history, for example, in the Renaissance or the Middle Ages, or even in the early part of the century, there could be no talk of creativity without the talk of the creator writ large. I mean, what is the essence of creativity? And because we become so modern and so knowledgeable, in quotes, we just can, we can do away with the idea of some sort of transcendence in general. Everything is pragmatic, it's rational. And the way that I view the world and have since a kid, and the way I view my own sort of creative work, there's nothing rational about it, except for the fact that there are chord structures and, there's architecture, certainly. But what underpins, the architecture underpins what? It underpins this amorphous, mystery-filled, transcendent stuff that doesn't really have a name, nor should it. Once you start to name it, it can shut down. The other thing I think is that we're very rational people. I'll be getting my car, for example, at the right time. I'll keep it filled with gas. I'll make the payments on time. It's very rational. But I'm quite aware that I spend, when I can actually sleep, around a quarter of my life in a dream world, where I'll be like riding on the back of a ceramic camel, speaking a language I've never spoken before. And it's, there's violence there, there's sexuality that would never, it's to say that all of us rational people are not quite rational at all. That's not to say that we shouldn't have a rational front and we shouldn't treat each other in a rational, orderly, generous manner. But behind all that is this huge mystery that often gets avoided because it doesn't fit into the times, which want to define everything in scientific and rational terms.
Well, does pragmatism breed cynicism because people don't want to consider, the transcendence of something or something bigger than themselves? Because, when people don't, consider the divine, and you don't even have to be, you could be an atheist or an agnostic person, but still recognize that there is some greater entity. And I think that might, I think the pragmatism breeds sort of the cynicism and then the self-shaming, but because I'm speaking from my own experience.
Well, I mean, I'll take it, from the last to the thing you just said to the first. I don't really buy religious. I don't really buy agnostic. I don't really buy atheistic. Those are just terms. I don't really place that much import. People that say, I believe in God, which I might say, but what does that even mean? I mean, once you start to define that, it's slipped through your fingers. People who are avowedly atheist may also say that there are things, not everybody, but perhaps the majority with them, there's things that are not knowable. Mm-hmm. And that isn't to say that were you to study harder, you would know it, that just you haven't come across it in a book. I'm saying they're fundamentally not knowable. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that even an avowed atheist might think. I was a huge admirer of Christopher Hitchens.
Me too.
And I heard him speak, incidentally, probably a few weeks before he was diagnosed. Mm. And I thought his loss, by the way, I'm going to get back to the original thing about pragmatism in a second. I thought his loss was a big loss for people who viewed themselves as religious, because he stood and created this polarity. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. This is bullshit. And it made people have to investigate their spiritual beliefs more closely. You know, not that you're going to put a beaker and you're going to come up with the answer with a slide rule. Mm-hmm. But I thought that he was a tremendous foil against fraudulence. And speaking of like pragmatism, did that, you know, does that harm our, I don't know what it was that you asked, our psyche, our belief? I don't think so at all. I think that sheer raw pragmatism, when you're tuning a guitar, it needs to be tuned to A440 unless there's some special purpose. You can't be slack. You have to have skills and mastery. That's pragmatic. If you say you're going to be there at 7:30, you need to be there. If you've made a commitment to a man or to a woman, you need to be there. You have a child, you need to be pragmatic in raising that child. Those are hugely important. But on the other hand, there are things that are not pragmatic. There are things that are dreamlike, that have a completely different essence. And to surrender one or the other, I think, leaves a person weak, more vulnerable than they should be.
I just, you know, you made me think of, I watched Christopher Hitchens on YouTube maybe about a week ago, and he spoke at some kind of memorial for Daniel Pearl.
Oh, that's where I saw him live.
Okay.
That's exactly where I was.
Is that where you were?
UCLA. Yeah.
He said something that just knocked me, you know, it was such a beautiful line. He quoted Macbeth. And the line was, I think it's when Seward says, you know, like, your son died a soldier's death, you know, but he died a man nonetheless. And I'm totally paraphrasing. And he said, your grief should not be measured to his worth, or your grief will never end. And that knocked me out.
That's such a beautiful thing, right?
It really is. And I hope I got the names right, but that was such a,
no, that's such a beautiful thing, right?
Yeah. And for a man who was, he was very, what's the word? I think he enjoyed stirring things up, but there.
Yeah. He was a provocateur for sure. Right. Do you know that he's Jewish?
Yeah. And he
found out much later in his life.
Yeah.
He found out later that his mother was Jewish.
Well, he said that the only thing he blames, well, he said that he wished that the Jews had lost against, you know, the Assyrian Hellenism, you know, during the Hanukkah period. I don't know if it's, he said the Hellenistic foe that the Maccabees fought in Hanukkah, because then we wouldn't have any religion. But in a sense, you know, well, obviously I disagree, because I take great pride in that. But I also know that he felt, I don't know for a fact, but it seemed like it brought him a great deal of comfort to find out that he was matrilineally Jewish.
Yeah. And, you know, well, that is essentially that is Jewish without any, caveat.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that people consider people who are fundamentally, say, God-fearing, God-aware, to be sort of nuts. And where Christopher Hitchens, I don't know this particular quote or where you got it from, but that the Hellenists should have won because then we wouldn't have had religion.
Mm-hmm.
But the dogmatism, the certainty, the surety of there being no God, that to me, it seems like extremely dogmatic as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have to understand, I'll admit there's a huge question mark around my belief system. I could be totally wrong. But on the other hand, when somebody is completely certain that there's nothing else there, when we die, it's just, it's all science, and we black out, and that's darkness forever.
Right.
That's a big leap too. So let's at least admit the two sides that we're dealing with. They're both unprovable. They're both not subject to, empirical proof. And, that's where a discussion can begin. I always enjoy speaking with people. Maybe you follow me on my Facebook journeys too, from like all points of view. And the viewpoints that I have, I don't really always share them, but I can assure you some of them are not the same as people would imagine they would be on any side of anything.
Well, I think it at the core, I think that you take great, you have great pleasure in helping people sort of awaken, awaken inside, and harness some of that creativity. Your company, or not your company, I'm sorry, but what would you call it? How would you describe Big Muse?
I call it my company. Why not?
Okay, so what,
the
Big
company
Muse, are you the Big Muse?
I don't think so.
Right.
I think the Big Muse is something else. If I'm lucky, I can sometimes bring myself across a bridge to this idea of open creativity. And usually when I do that, I can lead others across the bridge. And that's kind of what people pay me for. I think it's like this. And it all starts with my own, I don't proclaim to have any special skills at all, other than the fact that I can tell a good story, let's say, or make people feel something that I feel. So I know that I usually walk around like this. I mean, that is my way. It could be here, it could be worse. But through certain conversations and certain practices, I can expand the lens. And now I'm not so polarized. I'm not so dogmatic. I'm really free and desirous of talking to people from completely different points of view. And when you expand that thing, whatever this myopia starts to become eliminated, and now you're just kind of seeing more than you saw before, it's a much more fruitful place. Of course, it'll come back again. You're almost never, it's never permanent. You have to take great pains to constantly open this. And it takes great strength, intellectual and courage sometimes to open it up. I enjoy the Facebook because I see the ruination of our country. Actually, I see it meted out. I don't kick off anybody from there's people that are rabidly on one side or the other, and they're almost they'd like to come to blows.
Yeah, it's hard to watch, actually.
Well, I mean, I think that people need to be a little more careful. If you've ever read there's a Spencer, I don't remember where I read it. It was this beautiful account of these two girls in Syria. One was Alawite, was from the regime side, that they're minority clan, and one was Sunni, and they were best of friends. And the story was told through the eyes of these two girls who could understand it. And they were the best of friends. They would bounce on each other's beds and tell stories when they were in like junior high about the boys they had crushes on.
Mm-hmm.
And Assad started, doing some stuff, and a rebellion grew. And well, this one girl was on the side of Assad. She was an Alawite, and the other one was a Sunni. And it got contentious between them. It started to get really contentious. And as soon as the rancor left the internet, it left the phone and was meted out in the streets. That is to say, as soon as that vitriol spills over and people get shot, people get killed, it almost seemed like it was boiling over this summer. But like when the blood goes in the streets and somebody's related to that person that got killed, whatever reason that you have is completely overtaken by rage. Most people could not handle it. I don't think I could.
I couldn't.
And then the end of the story was these two girls never spoke to each other. They hated each other. The Sunni, I think, was part of ISIS.
Yeah, they were.
She whatever happened to her, got raped and all that craziness. It just, we got to watch out our democracy. And this isn't a political thing about Trump or not about Trump. And draw, your own conclusions.
Right.
But it's very fragile. We're like standing on some balsa wood here. And people are not speaking to each other. The symbols are now like knives and nooses, and it's bad.
It's really bad. And I think that it's almost, someone had told me that he considers our so-called Generation X, those who were born in 1970, that we're sort of this ignored middle child, because we saw the benefits. By the time we were in junior high, we saw, I think the Berlin Wall fall a little later, but the end of communism, and the heroes of the civil rights era were still alive, and that we did see all of these great possibilities in action. And it drives me crazy because no one remembers any of the achievement, and they've conflated whatever it is to fit their particular narrative, both sides. But I did want to ask you about speaking at the War College, because I heard that you mentioned that, and how I'm sure you had a major impact on people who are completely pragmatic, and they're military guys. How did that come about?
Well, there are military men and women, first of all. I'll tell you what it is later and how it came about. Okay. I never went to college. Maybe that's one of my advantages. I wasn't sure for a minute that I even graduated high school. So in my journeys with Big Muse, I got a fellowship to study at Northwestern, at Kellogg, the business school. It was such a treat for me. My wife went to the law school. My kids are in great schools. And after I kind of got out of that program, it was a year-long program, I started getting the Northwestern Quarterly magazine with my name on it. My wife got one because she went to the law school, totally legit. Kind of a big joke in our house for a minute. So one of the professors, her name is Holly Rader, became a great friend of mine. And she asked me one day, and she's like a liberal Jewish woman. She's not somebody you'd imagine would have any connection to the War College, only because there had been some colonels studying at Kellogg that she was introduced to. And she asked if I would be interested in her nominating me for what they call the National Security Seminar at the United States Army War College. slight history on that. In America, where you go to become a general in the Army or the Marines or a ship admiral is the War College. And that War College is in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. A lot of people haven't heard of it. They've heard of,
Leavenworth.
Yeah, well, Leavenworth is for officers. They've heard of,
there's West Point, the
West Point is for, for younger officers. So this is where you go if you're a colonel.
Yeah.
So you're in your 50s and you've led, troops, men, women, you've been in countless firefights, you've done all sorts of stuff. You may have a PhD or two.
It's a great honor to go to the War College.
Yeah, it is. To be selected to go to be a student there is an amazing thing. You already achieved so much. So this Holly Rader, she said, would you like me to nominate you? Took a lot of work on her part. I said, let me think about that. Yes. My dad was a United States Marine. I'm like very interested in, I read all sorts of books on, the movement of troops and military demographics and things. It's just really interesting to me.
I sent you those morning reports with your dad on it.
That's right. That's exactly right. I got to check into those again. That's amazing. Right. So the National Security Seminar, this is an interesting thing on creativity and might strike some as well. This goes on at the Army. I wrote a big piece on this in Forbes too. The National Security Seminar was created decades ago so that you would have civilians come at the graduating week to listen to the kind of discussions that they're holding at the War College. I won't get too detailed on the nature of how the discussions were structured, but they were very intense. The civilians from various walks of life. In my group, there was a journalist from China. There was an executive from 3M. There was a state legislature, this guy who had been a lawyer and moved to Ferguson because he was, upset about what was going on there. So you had this diverse group of people that would challenge the students, not, like open warfare, but they would bring their civilian opinions in there because the Army understood, the military understood there's a big threat. And what is the threat? That the military mind will be so closed. It will be so myopically shut down because they live in this bubble. And I'll never forget what the commandant said at the last one of the closing ceremonies. It was about 500, students, and maybe there was 100 or 75 of us security seminar visitors. He said to the students, I want to have on your bookshelf a book that you vociferously disagree with. I want you to be listening to radio stations with themes that you don't agree with. I want you to be able to, in a Lincoln Douglas debate, support a side that you don't believe in. And this whole thing, and he asked for a show of hands. He said, how many people in this group are not from a military family? And out of 500 people, maybe 4 raised their hand. He goes, and this is why we do this seminar. Mm-hmm. Because it's a national security concern that you as leaders, are you still with me? It's my daughter chiming in. That you as leaders understand what's happening in the world outside this academy. So I went back there to teach afterwards, just before COVID started. And I asked one of the professors there, a guy that I like a great deal. His name is Ed Filiberti. And I think he was an innovation strategy teacher. I said, well, how comfortable will the students be about talking about values, purpose, beauty? I wrote to him. He writes me back kind of tersely. Values, purpose, completely germane. Beauty, I wouldn't mention it. You'll lose credibility with the students. I'm like, all right. So then I do some work through the year with wounded soldiers, and through that organization, it's out of Breckenridge, Colorado, I got in touch with a 4-star general, silver medal of honor. He's in his probably early 70s. And I catch him probably like fly fishing out on some river in Colorado. He knew I'd be calling. Goes up. His wife answers and goes up. Peter, I understand that you would be calling. What you have some questions for me about the War College? I know it quite well. I graduated from there. I know Ed Filiberti quite well. Why don't you shoot the questions? I'm here to listen. And I just like jumped in, and I'm like, values, purpose, beauty. Because I echo Ed's sentiments 100%. Values, purpose, that's what we talk about. That's what we want to deliver. I agree with Ed entirely. If you bring up the idea of beauty and so on, you will be discredited among the students, and they will tune you out, and that'll be the end of it. And I start kind of explaining my position, and he's listening. I can see him probably tying his fly, wanting to get back to the river. He goes, well, Peter, I'm listening to you. I'm not buying it, but if you have more to say, I'm still here to listen. And then I just went for it because, like, I'm not looking for a job. This was all pro bono and everything. I said, look, I play in a rock band. Okay. And I'm not conflating this with being in a firefight. Let's just get that clear from the beginning. But the bonds that I have from these people that I've played with for years and years on stage, it's akin to a very strong intimacy. I said, it's not sexual. I understand that, Peter. And, but it's an incredible bond that I find difficult to replicate in most other areas of my life. And here's where I pulled out my little stiletto. I said, so I would imagine that since you retired from the military, you too are having difficulty replicating the intimacies that you've had with your troops and your colleagues, even with your wife. I hear nothing but maybe the river. Well, Peter, if what you're talking about is the bonds of fraternity between a leader and his troops, between soldiers, and if what you're saying is that is a thing of beauty, then I do believe that beauty is an important part of what you should be talking about there. I'm saying, damn, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And he goes, and furthermore, is it not a thing of beauty? He starts to be rhapsodic about this whole thing. To see one's values and beliefs evinced in troops by the thousands. I'm like, man, that should be on your like letterhead. And he and I have since become like very close pen pal friends. And the whole thing was about beauty at the War College. I mean, it was about beauty and sorrow. It was about totally transcending this process and pragmatic stuff. And it was such a hit that they wrote a whole article. Ed Filiberti wrote an article in their quarterly magazine. I bet who was ever here in this survey session, such and such, and room, whatever it was, wondering what that music was coming out of that room. Well, here's what it was, and here's why it's practical. And that was a very defining moment for me, actually. People.
You didn't lose credibility then. Did you frame it a different way?
Not at all. I mean, I talked to them, to the students at length. One of the guys is from England because we train our allies.
Yeah.
You won't see any Russians there, no Chinese. The Turks, I think, are gone for the moment, at least when I was there. One guy said to me, he goes, Peter, you would you are right now with what you're saying, subverting the British military. This is absolutely insane what you're saying. It's completely contradicting everything that we're taught. Is to be steely-eyed. And he goes, but what you're saying is incredibly valuable because we're people. And I made a kind of caveat to them. Look, when you're flying your F-16 on a bombing mission or in a firefight, you're not going to be writing poetry. You're going to keep this stuff scabbarded, like a sword. You don't take it out. But to know that you have this, that you're connected to this sense of purpose, a sense of understanding and belief and values and who you are as a person and what connects you to other people, it's beauty, it's love.
I think that
now that is what every artist needs. That's what every parent needs. That's what every leader needs. That's what every human being needs. So I don't really divide up people as pragmatic or this or that. I'm working with people at Honeywell and they're like, well, these are type A engineers. Well, they go, I don't give a shit. I'm pragmatic too. I'm very practical. People are hungry to fuse those two things, which you asked me about at one point. Does the pragmatism detract from, I don't know, creativity or a sense of spirituality? The two things need to go hand in hand. People, and however one manifests them, however one thinks about them,
and the way they
one
treat
without
other people.
the other. Yeah, which is the manifestation of this understanding. If it's just some philosophical bullshit and you're actually an asshole in real life, it all falls to pieces. It has to be manifested, as you said. Well, how are you dealing with people?
I was thinking about earlier today, and at first I thought about this song a lot, and it's one of yours, but for a long time I didn't associate it with you because it was on this KGSR sampler that I had gotten when I was living in Texas, and it was about the postal worker who out and one of
Do you
his,
still have that song? I like to hear
I
it.
must have it, but one of the lines is when you're just like, he's telling him why he did it, because my boss
why
said,
he killed all these people.
Yeah,
right?
my boss said that my best isn't good enough.
Sure.
And I was thinking, I've thought about that song from time to time, not because I wanted to go postal, but I'm thinking, well, maybe things would have been a little different had his boss made him feel more, valued or something.
Somebody asked me yesterday, this company I'm going to be working with, he said, there's my boss, this guy's an executive, but he goes, when my boss hired me, he asked me this question. He goes, do you work to win or do you work to avoid failure? What do you think?
Too often have I worked to avoid failure.
Yeah, so this boss was, very insistent. He said, the person I was speaking with said, I work to win and for everyone to win. And the guy said, I shouldn't hire you. I never hire people that say that, but he did hire this guy. But I don't think that guy who said that even believes it. That would be keeping people in a paranoid, there is a certain type of creativity that comes from like adrenaline, but it's not fluid. It leaves you with very few possibilities. You whip people and they may do a certain thing, but you're not getting anyone's best. And if your best isn't good enough, what more can you do? He might say, the postal workers, boss might have said, look, I'm not getting your best. I've seen you do better. What's the matter? What's going on? That would have been helpful. Yeah. But no, you set this guy off and he went nuts.
Right.
Anyway, I got to go pick up my car and go see my most beloved relatives.
Victor Rutstein says hello from Highland Park.
Hello back. Hello back.
And next, we'll talk next. Willie wanted me to ask you about the time you guys played a jazz club in San Diego.
Oh, there was some things he probably doesn't even remember about that. All I remember from was a very long discussion backstage.
All right.
The discussion was this: how is it that somebody who is like completely a teacher of Kabbalah, which is Jewish mysticism, was like the idea that is usually couched like this: those who know don't say, those who say don't know. So how could this teacher not be keeping kosher? It's like a guy who plays the violin who doesn't know how to string the thing. And that's where the conversation developed. Anyway, Steve, great catching up. This is really nice to have met your daughter early on.
I'll be in touch. Thanks a lot, Peter.
All right.
Take care, brother.
Talk to you soon. Be well. Be well. Bye-bye.